The Idries Shah Foundation podcast. Practical Psychology for Today. Featuring the works of Idries Shah, voiced by David Ault. Welcome to the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. In this edition of the podcast, we will hear selections from Learning How to Learn by Idries Shah. This audio has been made available by the Idries Shah Foundation. Knowing one's own sincerity. Question: how can a person know whether he is sincere or not? Answer: to be a hypocrite is perhaps the worst thing there is, but I can think of something more destructive than that. It is to imagine that one is not false in good resolutions. Neither imagine that you are false, nor lash yourself, for both may be forms of self-indulgence. Have the courage to recognize that no matter how many people are impressed by the seeming humility and self-reproach of pious people, the real effort is in knowing about oneself, so that one can do something about it. Once you yield to the comparatively easy way of assuming personal guilt, you may become guilty of amusing yourself, reveling in your worthlessness. If you do that, people may admire you, they may point you out as a good example. Traditional texts may support your thoughts and actions, society may believe that it benefits from your existence, but you could yourself be nowhere. The real people of knowledge can be said to exist for the purpose of indicating to really earnest seekers that a man is really self-deceived when he feels that he is being righteous. They do not exist to paper over the cracks by agreeing that a certain train of thought or series of actions or both are invariable indications of genuine belief and practice. One of the great Sufis said, "A saint is a saint unless he knows that he is one." The Sufis have, throughout the centuries, commanded the respect and understanding of the majority of religious people by insisting that sincerity can never be simply assumed in oneself or in anyone else. People know the sincerity of themselves and others by observations of acts and study of thoughts and testing of words against performance. The superficially religious apply tests for sincerity which enable ignorance and misunderstanding to continue. The Bedouin Teacher. Rumi brings us a fine analogy of this, showing how people, in judging things from ignorance of the facts, come to false conclusions. In this tale, a Bedouin was listening to another man saying prayers. He began by repeating a passage from the Quran, where it is said in chapter 9, Repentance, verses 97 onwards, "The Arabs of the desert are the worst in unbelief and hypocrisy." Infuriating, the Arab gave him a blow on the head. The man at prayer continued the quotation, coming to the passage, "But some of the desert Arabs believe in God and in the last day." "That's better," said the Bedouin. "Now I have taught you how to behave." Here the Bedouin stands for the superficial and assumption-prone part of the mind of the literalist religious person, whose faith seems demonstrably based on conduct, and whose assessment of the faith of others is based on his own imagination of what the other person's beliefs mean. Rumi's Bedouin, and our questioner about sincerity, could have made this test, had they known of it, to think of the aphorism, "If you think that you are not self-deluded, just check whether you think well of yourself or not." The would-be and should-be people. There can be all the difference in the world between the would-be followers of the tradition and the should-be followers. Each of them may have the necessary capacity. The should-be ones could very well never have heard of metaphysics. They could even hate the idea of esotericism. Nowadays, there are still very many people who have no ideas about, nor interest in, religion, mysticism, things of the mind, though they are fewer every day. The would-be ones are those who have been attracted at some time or other to a scrap of genuine inner activity. They may have met some person, engaged in some such activity, read some literature. They are would-bes because they believe that because they have heard about something, might even have tried to practice it, for that reason they have a right to it. In general, close contact with the would-be shows that his interest is comparatively shallow. He is guilty, as the psychologist would claim, of desiring a system which fits in with preconceptions, seeking no more than to achieve any kind of personal equilibrium. He may have the capacity. Most frequently, he does not have the necessary attitude. He will tend, of course, to believe that he has got the right attitude. He will accuse others of not having it. Both types need education in Sufi evolutionary philosophy, initially by means of familiarization with its viewpoints and some of its materials. This is difficult because few general-purpose expositions of this material exist, contrary to the popularized belief that it must be in books, or I won't bother with books, but I will get it from someone in the flesh. But this is why there are, and always have been, Sufi schools. This is one reason why the schools take, to the crude observer, mystifyingly diverse outward forms. As Akhlaq-i-Mushini says, "The bird which knows not of sweet water has his beak in salt water all the year." Is your beak in salt water? This salt water in the mind of the Sufi is what is otherwise called the world. The ordinary person imagines that that which he more instantly perceives, like material objects and obvious, to him, thoughts, must logically be what is more real. But the Sufi says that so-called concrete things are not experienced but inferred. You infer fire from smoke, and smoke may appear to be real, but its underlying reality is the fire. When this habit of assuming that instantly perceptible things are more important than more subtle ones goes, the latter become perceptible. Sufi study is devoted to this task. It is for this reason that the great Sheikh Abdul Karim Jili says, "Truth, reality, al-haq, is felt, perceived. The world is inferred, makulun." As long as one regards what are in fact secondary things, including one's secondary conditioned self, as primary, the subtler but more real primary element, reality and the essence of the individual, will not be perceived. A meeting with 3 dervishes. I met 3 dervishes in the Middle East and asked them whether they had ever encountered any seekers from the West. Frequently, they told me. I asked them if they ever taught these people anything. "This is what happens," one of them said. "They come to us and say, 'Teach us,' and we start to try, sitting before them or leaving them there and retreating to communicate by direct perception." I wondered what happened next. Always the same thing. After 2 or 3 days, they set off again, complaining that we are not doing what we said we would do. Satisfactions and purpose of ritual. Question. We see people all over the world deriving satisfaction from ritual. How can we get beyond ritual? Answer. Initiation and celebratory rituals carried out by religions, societies, and other groupings can have various, very different origins, purposes, and functions. We might liken all these purposes, origins, and functions to, say, the various processes which are known to and carried out in any given science. In chemistry, distillation is not the same as fermentation. The use of alkalis is not the same as the use of acids. There is both industrial and research chemistry. In the case of the science of man, there are similar distinctions. When ritualism starts. When the knowledge of these distinctions disappears, ritualism takes over, or else the limited use of such processes. When the use and possibility is limited, the effect is slight. It may even be harmful. As Sadi says, though the fire worshipper may tend his flame for 100 years, if he falls into it, he will be killed. Take prayer. When prayers are carried out among people with a certain preparation, and when due regard is taken for such things as correct attunement, there will be one effect of prayer. If people are encouraged to pray without these or other elements, their prayer may become a psychotherapeutic tool, immensely valuable, but nonetheless at a lower level than its optimum function. Emotion mistaken for higher feelings. In such a case, emotional feelings are mistaken for spiritual ones. The only objection to such an activity is that a person or community triggered to associating prayer with emotion will be almost incapable of developing further, because the conditioning invariably elicited by the sight, sound, or participation in prayer will be an emotional one. Communities and individuals reared in the emotional and conditioned use of rituals and other procedures have to undergo a reorientation before they can perceive a higher content in such observances. This is difficult because such people generally seek a deepening of their familiar experience, not an improvement upon it. Sadi says in his Bostan, "Do not expect, my child, a reward from Omar when you are working in the house of Zaid." Definition of a Sufi. To learn, people must give up a great deal, and this includes ritual as something from which they imagine they might learn. It is to emphasize this that Abu Yaqub al-Suzi, quoted in Kalabadi's Taruf, states that the Sufi is one who does not care when something is taken from him, but who does not cease to seek for what he has not. Real and ostensible self-improvement. Question: does the Sufi school do anything about the automatism of man? Answer: ostensibly, and as far as they understand, people may be trying to improve themselves. In fact, as can be determined by studying what they are actually doing and what they really mean by what they say, they are often automatizing or diverting themselves. This is only because they are working with a shallow use of the mind, an area which becomes conditioned comparatively easily. Ironically, many who have heard of this process and see it in others think that they are immune from it by the very act of repeating that man becomes moribund, conditioned. Yet this very repetition will automatize, condition him. Liberation for such theoreticians is farther than it is from the non-initiate who has never heard of the argument. It is possible to turn away from automatism by using techniques devised to outmaneuver it. But first we must register sufficiently deeply, not just frequently or excitedly, that such a process is needed. Second, we must discover whether the individual involved has the capacity to be de-automatized. Third, we must prescribe the treatment for that particular individual. Fourth, we must assess whether he will abide by the treatment. These are among the reasons for the techniques and specialized studies of the real Sufi school. Some people are inwardly determined to retain their automatism while trying to profit from a Sufi school's work. I think that that is the real problem. You are in the bonds of attending to the beard and turban, says the Divan of Shamsi Tabriz. How will you gain the quaffer of the great goblet? The automatism of man is overcome, in the words of Dunoon, by aiming for being as you were, where you were, before you were. Roles of teacher and student. Question: how does the Sufi teacher overcome the fixed but unperceived biases of the student? Answer: Let us look at the relative positions of the teacher and the student. The student regards the teacher as someone who has a quantity of something and will give him a part of it. Or he may look upon him as someone who knows a method of achieving something. The teacher sees the student as someone who is eligible for gaining a portion of something. In another sense, he looks upon him as someone who can achieve something. Each in its own way, the attitudes of the two have a connection. The problem of the teacher is greater than the problem of the student. One reason for this is that the student is anxious to learn but seldom realizes that he can learn only under the conditions which make this learning possible. He cannot make real progress until he has undergone a preparation for learning. When this preparation is complete, the student may progress slowly, rapidly, or instantly through a number of phases in which he understands what he has called the meaning of life, or to know himself. The most important thing, therefore, is to get the student into an alignment in which his progress can be effective and continuous. This can only be directed by someone who knows the whole picture, and who knows what is possible and what is not, with an individual and a given group of people. Because the student is likely to be imprisoned by attitudes which have trained him, he will tend to approach the teacher and the teaching in all kinds of ineffective and minor ways. He will ask for peace of mind, progress in his worldly life, money, knowledge, illumination, assurances, all things which may be important in one way or another, but which are not necessarily relevant to his situation. In other words, he asks to be taught or to be given knowledge and things which he happens to be wanting for the sole reason that he has decided that these are necessary or urgent. This, from some viewpoints, is a ridiculous situation. It is as if a schoolboy were to say, "Yes, teach me French, but teach me only at 4 p.m. Or, "I want to learn mathematics, but I will not do so in this particular class." Or again, "I would like to learn the principles of biology, but first I must have some information about tadpoles, because to my mind they are the most important thing." The fact is that you can learn only what you can be taught. If you impose or interpose conditions gained from speculation, emotion, imagination, intellect, and so on, you will still have to learn how to learn. This means finding out how to collect knowledge, stage by correct stage, without the foregoing limitations. The human being, not knowing what he really is, not knowing where he came from or where he can go to, is hardly in a position merely to assume that he should get his instruction in this or that form, or that before he does anything else his warts should be charmed, or his house set in order in a way which he happens capriciously or even dedicatedly to demand. The first duty of the teacher is to make this plain, and not to compromise with the superficial sentiments which many people believe are fundamentals. Rumi says, "You are a lover of your own experience, not of me. You turn to me to feel your own emotion." If you look at the way in which you approach things, including your desire to learn and its expression in action, and if you note what mistakes you have made and also what the Sufis say about the roles of teacher and student, you will realize that the fixed but unperceived biases of the student to which you refer need someone outside of the student to supply the stimuli which will enable him, or her, to escape from the trap of customary thinking patterns. Students who do not learn. Sheikh Abdullah Ansari of Herat, recognized as one of the clearest exponents of the school, as well as one of its greatest sages, lists the things which people do and think which block their progress. These cause bafflement, sorrow, and confusion. People who do not follow their teacher's prescriptions either remain in one of those conditions or else adopt some, often unperceived, psychological stratagem which causes hypocrisy, fanaticism, or imagined understanding. These are the things which the student cannot measure in himself, and which the teacher attends to. To want before it is due, to desire more than is due, to want for oneself what belongs to others. Some people, of course, are so willful that even if you tell them that you are not going to compromise with fixed biases, they will continue to battle. In such cases, the teacher will disappoint their expectations by making himself out to be unsuitable to the student, borrowing from the Malamati techniques. Even then, the delinquent student may not be able to understand what is going on, and will put all kinds of fanciful interpretations on the matter. Sadi, in the Gulistan, has a tale about this. Tale of the Muezzin. There was once a muezzin who called the faithful to prayer with such an awful voice that the mosque trustee, a kindly man, offered him 10 dinars to go to another town. Subsequently, he came across the trustee and said, "You offered me only 10 dinars to go to another town, but where I am now they are offering 20, but I still refuse to leave." The trustee laughed and said, "Hold out, and you will find that they will even go as high as 50. This podcast is copyright 2018, the Idries Shah Foundation.